Hey, everybody. It is Monday, November 10th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu, and my voice is back.
He's back. I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines, so you don't have to. Jill, appreciate you doing the solo show on Friday.
Moshe, my pleasure. I'm glad that your voice is back. And just a heads up, I'm going to be doing another solo podcast tomorrow night, actually, because you are currently in Texas on a really important shoot.
Yeah, we have a new partnership with Target. You're familiar with them. Well,
Target, of course.
Target. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about a variety of things. We actually had a number of you submit your questions to Target for the shoot we're doing at one of their stores in the Dallas-Fort Worth area on Monday. And then, well, pending these airline delays, we plan to head back to New York. And so, Jill, you'll be handling duties for tomorrow's pod, and then I'll return the favor for the next day. So we will be back together again later this week.
And with that, let's get to the news, because there is a deal to end the longest government shutdown in American history. We've got details on the late Sunday vote and when things might get back to normal if the shutdown finally ends.
Yeah, a lot of things pending here.
It comes after a weekend of massive flight delays and cancellations across the country, with warnings that if the shutdown does not end, it could get a lot worse.
People waiting 4 hours to take off at Newark Airport yesterday if your flight was actually taking off.
Could Americans see a $2,000 check in their bank accounts? President Trump says it is possible thanks to tariff revenue. Heading overseas, top BBC officials resign after a bombshell report that shows anti-Trump edits and anti-Israel bias. Also, Syria's new leader, who not that long ago had a $10 million bounty on his head, will meet with President Trump today to talk about counterterrorism in a stunning reversal. Following that deadly UPS cargo plane crash last week, the FAA is halting MD-11 flights. What investigators are learning about the crash. And finally, to the end of the Earth, literally, a 40-year-old explorer begins his historic 1,800-mile solo journey across Antarctica. We look at what he is bringing with him. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
An 8-foot, 2-inch character makes their first appearance on American television.
Barney?
Jill is close, but that's not it. But we'll have the answer at the end of today's podcast.
All right, a critical group of Senate Democratic centrists reached a deal with Senate Republican leaders and the White House late Sunday to end the longest government shutdown in American history. The deal will soon reopen the government through the end of January in exchange for a future vote on extending Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies. But not all Democrats are happy with the deal after they held out for 40 days. And that is because this deal does not have a guarantee from Republicans to extend those Obamacare healthcare subsidies that have been at the heart of the funding fight, but they're just promising a vote on it. However, Democrats that are involved in the talks say that House and Senate GOP leaders have committed to negotiate a compromise in the coming weeks. One of those Democrats is Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He represents thousands of federal workers in the state and who said that he supports the GOP's promise for a future vote on the subsidies. Importantly for Kaine, Democrats also secured an agreement from the White House to reverse its mass firings of thousands of federal workers during the shutdown, as well as protections against more firings from happening for the rest of this fiscal year. It also guarantees that all federal workers will be paid for time during the shutdown. Remember, there was a time where Trump would not guarantee that. He also wouldn't guarantee that he was going to bring everyone back. So this deal is a departure from demands that Senate Democrats made at the start of the weekend. They have been looking for at least a 1-year extension of the enhanced Obamacare tax credits to ensure millions of Americans can still afford health care. And that's been a key to the Democrats, who have been refusing to pass short-term funding extensions since the shutdown started on October 1st. Given that the cost of the government insurance marketplace continues to go up, Senator Chuck Schumer also proposed the creation of a bipartisan committee to address long-term reforms to address healthcare affordability. Among the Democrats that voted for this deal, Senators Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, Angus King of Maine, and Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, all of them former governors, by the way, and they did help in the negotiations, along with Senate Majority Leader John Thune and the White House.
Yeah, what's interesting about what took place here, Jill, remember, we've been in a shutdown since October 1st. We wake up this morning on November 10th. And there were enough moderate Democrats here who were like, we're going to defy leadership. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and House Democrats, we were with you until we couldn't be with you anymore. The pain of the government shutdown is getting to be too much, and we're striking our own deal with Republicans and with the White House. And so you did hear from Schumer and others last night who are not happy about this. They wanted to hold out longer. They believe that momentum is on their side. They believe that, people understand the significance here of what they were looking for on healthcare insurance subsidies. So, Jill, if you were following social media last night or this morning, there are a lot of Democrats who are very upset about this, that, they felt they had leverage here, and all they got after a 40-day holding out was a promise from Republicans in the Senate to vote on an extension of the healthcare subsidies. These are the subsidies that are going to run out at the end of the year. Millions of Americans depend on them. And right now, healthcare insurance is getting so expensive. The Democrats had, at the outset here, going into October 1st, going to the shutdown, said, we're going to hold out until you guarantee these subsidies stay beyond December 31st. This group of moderate Democrats basically took the deal saying, well, Republicans have agreed to negotiate a compromise here. And we'll get there. Most of the Democrats, though, said, no, we needed to hold out until we had a guaranteed deal. And so that is the divide you're going to see play out here among Democrats. You had a number who came out last night, including Richard Blumenthal. He's a Democratic senator from Connecticut. He said, it's no deal without health care. If health care isn't included, if it's not a guarantee, I'm a no. And so there's a lot of Democrats who do not trust John Thune, and in particular, do not trust Speaker Johnson and President Trump here. For them, they come away fuming. Now, keep in mind, the Senate voted on Sunday night. The House still needs to vote, and that means that all the House members who've been out of session now for more than a month, because Speaker Johnson hasn't held any votes, need to make their way back to Washington to vote on this deal. It appears here Democrats in lockstep in the House are not going to vote for it. Maybe there are going to be some who, decide to cross lines here. But remember, in the House is majority rules. And so if Speaker Johnson can get his team in line, his party in line, this shutdown is set to be over in the coming hours or days. There is a deal here. At the heart of the debate, again, is those healthcare subsidies. And a lot of Republicans don't like these tax credits, even though they acknowledge that they're very beneficial to millions of Americans that once they expire might not be able to afford Obamacare anymore, be on the federal program or on these state programs. And by the way, based on the numbers, the majority of Obamacare recipients happen to live in red states. So we are going to continue to follow, what Democrats actually got here and follow the debate amongst them. We're also going to follow, whether the House follows through on this and how quickly the shutdown actually does come to an end. The thing that I think spurred the action here, Jill, or I should say two things. One, travel chaos hit over the weekend. Air traffic controllers now having missed 2.5 paychecks. More than half of all commercial flights on Sunday either experienced delays or cancellations. We're talking more than 2,000 flights canceled on Sunday. 7,000 plus flights experienced delays, and it was going to get worse here. And then the other item was SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits, that millions of Americans, 40 plus million Americans get SNAP benefits. They hadn't gotten their money. There was a whole legal fight that was playing out over the weekend. And so those two items, I think, crucially led this group of moderate Democrats in the Senate to say, we're going to strike a deal here with Republicans.
Moshe, you mentioned the travel chaos over the weekend. Sunday was the third day that the FAA ordered reduced air travel at dozens of major airports across the country. The issue is that while air traffic controllers are essential workers who are expected to show up to work during the shutdown without pay, they've now gone 2 pay periods without being paid. And that has led many of them to take other jobs like Uber driving or delivering food, others staying home to take care of kids and families because they can no longer afford childcare. So a reminder that nearly half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck or close to that. And there's also already a shortage of air traffic controllers before the shutdown. And now a number are retiring early in recent days. And some say the stress of the shutdown has made an already stressful job intolerable. So with an existing shortage of controllers and many not at work, the FAA has slowed down the number of flights able to take off or land to keep things safe for the controllers who are left. And of course, make sure that the flights can arrive and depart safely.
Yeah, remember, there's only so many flights that a person safely can manage as an air traffic control tower or one of these regional facilities. And so for safety purposes, they're like, well, if only 4 out of 20 people show up to work, we need to slow down or mandate cancellations of a whole number of flights. At one point on Sunday, there were tons of cancellations at Newark Airport, and then the planes that were still moving ahead, there was a 4-hour delay on the runway for takeoff. At Atlanta's airport, the world's busiest, 18 of 22 controllers didn't show up to work on Saturday. A remarkable thing. 4 people managing flights in and out of Atlanta there. So that slowed things down. And Jill, they weren't the only essential workers at the airport working without pay or, at this point, taking other jobs so they could pay their mortgages, pay their rent, handle basic duties. You also had TSA agents. So TSA security lines were also an issue in a number of places, though with a number of cancellations by the airlines a day in advance. The TSA lines were a little bit better, but it was still the flights, the major delays there, particularly on Sunday, that were a major issue. Jill, it's not clear that things will get much better today or tomorrow or Wednesday, but we will see if people start to return to work here. If the deal goes through here in the Senate and goes through in the House and President Trump signs it, it's still going to take a few days for them to get their back pay. So we'll see what happens there. And as you noted, even with the shutdown ending and even with them getting back pay, the air traffic control issues far from over. We're still 3,000 plus air traffic controllers short in this country right now. It's a significant issue. And now add to that, we haven't gotten the full numbers here on the number of air traffic controllers that retired just because they couldn't deal with the stress anymore. The job itself is stressful. Many of them have been working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, no vacation time. Now add to, the last month, the last 6 weeks into that. And they said, you know what? I've had it. I'm done with all of this. And so there will continue to be issues here. Continue to check with your airline. A number of you, I know you have big events coming up. You've been messaging us. If you have a big event coming up, especially in the next couple of days, you can debate taking a train or driving potentially to guarantee you get to where you need to be going. I know Alex and I have once we come back from Texas, we have a event in Northern New York at Syracuse University. We were planning on flying, but those seem like the easy flights for them to cancel. And so I think we're going to be making the long drive from New York City up there. Jill, I mentioned SNAP benefits earlier. There was a whole legal fight that played out over the weekend. The Trump administration refusing to fully fund SNAP, judges saying you need to fully fund it. A lot of back and forth went up to the Supreme Court. Important to note, as part of this deal that was struck in the Senate on Sunday night, SNAP is now funded fully through next September, even if, Jill, the government shuts down again. And I mention that because Jill said at the top, they're going to fully fund most of the government through January 30th. You know what that means. Another deadline, January 30th, in about 60 days. But they did guarantee some funding like SNAP through, again, September. So that's nice.
And Moshe, another wrinkle here is that all of those House members that need to vote on this bill, many of them have to get on flights because they're in their home districts and they need to get back to Washington, D.C. in order to vote. So all of those flight delays and cancellations could ironically extend this shutdown even further. So given all of that, make sure everybody check out the Instagram account at Moshe, Mosheh. Throughout the day, we'll have updates on where things stand.
Yeah, good note there. I guess that would be an incentive for air traffic controllers to come to work today, is get those members of Congress back to Washington so they can vote to end the shutdown and get you your back pay.
All right, time for the speed read from The Hill. President Trump announced on social media Sunday that Americans should get $2,000 apiece thanks to tariff revenue. He said, quote, people that are against tariffs are fools, and that a dividend of at least $2,000 a person would be paid to everyone. He said it would exclude high-income Americans, but he didn't specify what exactly high income is. He also said the administration would pay down the enormous debt using tariff revenue. Right now, the debt is over $38 trillion. Through the first 3 quarters of this year, the Treasury Department collected $195 billion from tariff revenue. Some in the administration have said it could get up to $500 billion a year.
Yeah, so doing some back of the envelope math here, by the end of the year, let's say we get between $400 billion and $500 billion in tariff revenue. About 200 million Americans would be eligible. If you look at the numbers, roughly at $2,000 a paycheck, that would about empty out the tariff revenue, about $400 billion to pay 200 million people $2,000 a piece. So it's not clear where they would pay down the debt from that. Again, Jill, 38 trillion going on 48 trillion. We pay $1 trillion a year just in interest. So even with $500 billion a year in tariff revenue, it is just, a small drop in the bucket. And now with Trump offering this dividend, we'll see where it goes. But keep in mind, like many things, this would require Congress. Congress would need to pass a piece of legislation with any proposal to directly pay Americans the tariff dividend, if you will. There was a proposal earlier this year for a $600 check on the tariffs. It didn't really go anywhere. We'll see what happens there. It is notable, though, because on Sunday, separately, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, said that tariffs are about rebalancing trade and paying off the debt. Now Trump is looking at these checks. Now, it's not a coincidence that this comes after the Supreme Court heard the case. We told you about it last week on tariffs. The Supreme Court, by the way, several conservatives on the court, looking like they're going to rule against the president here on a number of his tariffs that came through this emergency power the president believes he has. So if his tariffs are struck down, the key question then comes up, well, where does this money go that the government's taken in from tariffs if we deem them unconstitutional? They have to be paid back to importers and stores. Well, not if Trump writes a check to Americans. The money is gone. So it sort of solves a problem there for the president. Again, a lot of legal questions here when it comes to all of this. And keep in mind, even though the $2,000 check sounds great, the effective tariff rate on all of us is about 18%, meaning this has effectively been an 18% consumption tax on things we're buying. So this is basically a refund to some of you, a partial refund to some of you, depending on how much you've spent this year and how much of that has been, a price that was increased by tariffs. But still very preliminary. Again, Congress would need to pass this as a bill, as a law, and we know how they work.
No, Moshe, what do you mean? They're not totally functioning?
They still have to they still have to reopen the government. Then we'll see if they can get to the whole, getting us $2,000 checks.
From the Associated Press, the head of the BBC in London resigned Sunday after backlash following edits to a documentary about President Trump. So the documentary edited parts of a speech that Trump had made on January 6th, 2021, before protesters attacked the Capitol in Washington. The edit made it look like Trump explicitly encouraged violent Capitol Hill riots and cut out a section where Trump said that he wanted his supporters to demonstrate peacefully. BBC's Director General Tim Davie and CEO Deborah Turness both announced their resignations on Sunday. Turness said that the controversy about the Trump documentary has reached a stage where it is causing damage to the BBC. And she says that, quote, "the buck stops with me."
If that name sounds familiar, by the way, for those of you who closely watch the media, Deborah Turness used to run NBC News here in the U.S. for a bit before heading back over to England and working for the BBC. Now, the White House last week was calling BBC fake news, was really grilling them about this. And so this was just among several controversies the BBC has been facing here. So there was that edit on Trump. There's also major backlash for their coverage of Israel and Gaza. A 19-page internal whistleblower report was leaked to the Daily Telegraph newspaper in the UK last week. And that is where an independent advisor said there were major issues with anti-Israel bias in the BBC's Arabic service. They claimed that BBC Arabic platformed people who claimed to be journalists but were not journalists. Some of them saying things that Jews should be burned as Hitler did, others calling Jews not even people and devils. Some of those individuals, Jill, appeared on the BBC more than 500 times to do commentary on the war. They said in multiple incidents in this BBC report of not even noting attacks from Hamas and Hezbollah on Israel, but only the Israeli retaliation. Accusations that Israel was staging attacks inside Israel. A car ramming attack that killed a 79-year-old Israeli woman, questions as to whether that was terrorism or just resistance. And it went on and on and on with the various examples here. Now, to those of you who've been watching their coverage closely, this probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. But ultimately here, things coming to a head at the BBC. The Trump controversy, this controversy. There was another one recently, Jill, where a BBC anchor decided she wanted to say pregnant women instead of pregnant people. The BBC apparently had gone with a more inclusive term, pregnant people, as opposed to pregnant women. And an anchor live on television read it and then corrected it, saying pregnant women. and then apparently got criticized internally for it. In this report, the whistleblower is saying that it was totally appropriate for her to be able to use the word pregnant women. So a number of issues here at BBC. And so if you think that American media are dealing with various internal issues, well, across the pond, they have their own.
From Reuters, President Trump set to host a landmark meeting with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara today. He landed in Washington on Saturday, a day after the U.S. government removed him from a terrorism blacklist. His visit is a stunning turnaround in U.S. diplomatic and counterterrorism history. It will be the first time a Syrian president has visited the White House. Today's meeting is set to focus on counterterrorism efforts. But most incredibly, it was just 11 months ago, 11 months, not even a year, that the United States had a $10 million bounty on the Syrian leader's head. Al-Shara joined al-Qaeda about 20 years ago. He was arrested in Iraq in 2005. He spent 6 years in an American military prison in Iraq. He was then released in 2011. He went on to lead an affiliate of al-Qaeda in Syria. He was designated a terrorist by the United States in 2013. 3 years later, he renounced his allegiance to al-Qaeda. And late last year, his rebel forces ousted longtime dictator Bashar al-Assad.
And ipso facto, we decide, well, he now leads Syria. We would like him to be our friend. So that whole 20 years of him being an Islamist, jihadist, a guy who served time in a U.S. military prison in Iraq, who was friends with Baghdadi, but then they had a falling out when Baghdadi went to form ISIS, and so he formed an al-Qaeda affiliate, and his involvement in killing a number of Americans, whether in Iraq and other places. Well, he runs a country now, and we should get to him and get close to him. This is the real politique analysis here, before Iran befriends him and before Putin befriends him. He can be our friend. Jill, there's footage of him playing pickup basketball with the CENTCOM commander, like the head of U.S. military forces who oversees the Middle East. And again, this was a guy that we were trying to kill with a drone for a number of years. But he takes out Assad. And so he is now been increasingly our friend over time. He got to meet Trump in Saudi Arabia back in May. He addressed the UN General Assembly in New York in September. And the U.S. here is very much focused on Syria's stability, reconstruction. Trump is very much pushing a potential peace deal between Syria and Israel. That hasn't existed since Israel was created in 1948. Those two have fought a number of wars there. So Syrian jihadist terror group leader turned buddy, turned ally here, appears to be the trajectory that al-Shara is on. So it will be one of the more unique meetings that we see in the Oval Office today, as it's set to take place. And one we'll be telling you more about over on Instagram today. But always remember the old adage in politics and diplomacy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And in this case, my pickup basketball partner.
From the Washington Post, federal aviation officials on Saturday grounded the type of cargo planes involved in last week's deadly crash at a UPS hub in Kentucky. The MD-11 planes will get further inspection to determine whether or not they're safe. The order applies to more than 100 aircraft. Nearly 30 years ago, Boeing announced that it would be phasing out its MD-11 jetliner production. In recent days, UPS and FedEx grounded their fleets out of an abundance of caution. This model makes up around 9% of UPS's fleet and around 4% of FedEx's. Now, as for that crash in Louisville, the jet's left engine detached during takeoff. That is what actually led to the crash. It killed 14 people and sparked a large fireball as the aircraft hit two businesses. About 20 others were injured from the crash.
And we are getting some details from the cockpit voice recorder. There was a repeating bell in the final seconds before the aircraft crashed. It's not clear what the bell that was ringing was indicating. In earlier findings, the NTSB said a fire broke out on the left wing, and the left engine completely detached and fell to the ground. And one of the reasons, Jill, this was just such a large crash, such a huge fireball, is this was a journey from Kentucky to Hawaii. So they were loaded up with tons of fuel there for that trip. And of course, just crashing just after takeoff there. And certainly something that these two major shippers want to get to the bottom of, given the MD-11 and how key it is to daily deliveries.
And finally, Moshe, from NBC News, explorer Colin O'Brady is about to attempt something that no human has ever done: cross the entire continent of Antarctica solo and unsupported. So that means no resupplies, no kites, no dogs. It will just be O'Brady, a 500-pound sled, and the endless white horizon. It's expected to take 110 days, and he will cross nearly 1,800 miles of ice. And it is summer currently in Antarctica, so there will be 24 hours of sunlight. The 40-year-old is expected to start his journey in the coming days. He's expected to burn about 10,000 calories per day. He's going to wear the same clothing every day. And yes, that includes just one pair of underwear. He'll be living on dehydrated meals, and he'll melt snow for water with a small gas stove. Moshe, no Google Maps. O'Brady will actually be navigating off a compass.
What about Waze? Is there Waze in Antarctica?
He'll share updates through a portable satellite unit that will let him transmit about one picture or message a day for his team to post to social media. He is calling the expedition Further because it is nearly twice as far as his last record-setting journey across Antarctica back in 2018. An NBC profile of O'Brady showed him surrounded by duffel bags and dried ramen in an Airbnb in southern Chile. That is going to be his launching point to the bottom of the earth.
And Jill mentioned it is Antarctic summer, but just for reference, summer in Antarctica, still the high falls between 0 and 40 degrees. And then sometimes falls into the negatives or deep negatives. So Antarctica in the summer is, not beach weather, even when you have that 24-hour sun. When asked what he's doing with this, like, is it just about the record? He said, no, it's about something deeper here. I'm curious if I can go back and push myself, not just farther in distance, but in a spiritual context, mind, body, and soul. Jill, he noted that he deletes most of his music and podcasts. So it's not like for 110 days, he's going to be, brushing up on Mo News podcasts or any other podcasts or listening to some good books. He prefers just solo time and silence.
With Ken Burns.
Oh, thank you. Well, you listened to it. Some of you may have listened to it. Colin O'Brady will not be listening to it for the next 110 days as he makes his way across Antarctica here. Now, I will say that he has faced some scrutiny in the past. Back in 2020, a National Geographic article accused him of embellishing and exaggerating key details in his book, Impossible First. That was a book that he wrote about his 932-mile journey across a different part of Antarctica. This, again, is an 1,800-mile journey, twice as long. A Netflix crew is following his preparations for this. But once the plane drops him off, the crew won't be with him anymore. It'll just be O'Brady and the ice and him pulling that 500-pound sled. There were pictures on the NBC News story of Jill of him pulling a similar sled on a beach as he practiced for all of this. Now, the risks are real. There was a British explorer named Henry Worsley who tried this exact trip back in 2016, and he died. Now, O'Brady has come close to death before. He said he fell into a deep crack in a glacier, unroped, and barely survived last time. Back in 2008, he was told he might not ever walk again, but then he would go 18 months later to win a Chicago triathlon. So ultimately here, a trip we will closely be watching, but we won't know much about with just one transmission a day as he makes his way across that continent. All right, now time for On This Day in History. On this November 10th, Oorah! It's the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Marine Corps. On this day in 1775, during the American Revolution, the Continental Congress passes a resolution that 2 battalions of Marines be raised for service. It was drafted by future President John Adams, adopted in Philadelphia on this day in 1775, creating the Continental Marines. So it is observed, of course, as the birth date of the U.S. Marine Corps today. There are more than 175,000 active duty and reserve Marines divided into several divisions. So thank you to all of our current Marines and Marine veterans for their service. On this day in 1975, the freighter Edmund Fitzgerald, you might know it from the Gordon Lightfoot song, sank during a storm in Lake Superior, killing all 29 people aboard, making it the most famous shipwreck on the Great Lakes. A bit of pop culture, music, and TV history for you. The answer to the clue at the top, the 8'2" individual who premiered on television in America on this day, Big Bird, Sesame Street, making its debut on PBS. Big Bird was the first Muppet to appear in the first episode of Sesame Street.
So it was not Barney after all that.
It was not Barney, but you knew where we were going with this one, Jill. You figured it out. On this day in 1990, Home Alone premieres 35 years ago today. For reference, Macaulay Culkin is currently 45 years old.
And for the record, Moshe, 35 years later, if I hear any sort of noise in my house that I'm going to check out, I think in my head, this is my house. I have to defend it.
The wet bandits might be sneaking in.
Without fail. All right, everybody, that is a wrap of this edition of the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Thanks, everyone. You're in good hands with Jill tomorrow, and I'll see you guys back here on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.